Hey, uh, good morning, everyone. We're still before noon, so I'll call it good morning. I appreciate you being here. My name is Andy Josephson. Today, we're having a lunch and learn, as you can see, here at the Anchorage Legislative Information Office. So all of the Anchorage delegation has offices above us here. You're welcome to stop by any time and talk to any member you can schedule time with. Today, we're very lucky to have what's called a lunch and learn. Typically, out of Juneau, we have lunches and learn, I think is the way it would be called. And uniquely, we're having one here in Anchorage, sponsored by my office in conjunction, importantly, with the Alaska Community Action on Toxins. And they're going to talk about the release of a report late this spring on the impact of the plastics crisis on Arctic environments and indigenous peoples. And we have with us Pam Miller, who's an internationally recognized advocate combating and fighting this plastics crisis and other toxic release issues. And we're going to hear about the connection between the oil industry in particular, I think, and the production of petrochemicals and from them plastics. And you'll hear the term hemispheric sink because the Arctic, as it's warming faster, part of that is also its connection to sort of the accumulation of plastic toxins. So with that, we'll turn it over to Pam Miller.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Representative Josephson, for hosting us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for coming today to this briefing. My colleague, Waghiyi, and I will be presenting the findings of our report on the plastics crisis, but also the interlinkages among chemicals, plastics, and climate in the North and in the Arctic in particular, including the circumpolar Arctic. And I also just want to acknowledge our staff. We have several of our staff members here: Sarah Thomas, environmental justice organizer; Corey Johnson, who is brand new, serving as a fellow with the Jesuit volunteer program; and there's Sama, Samadi Singwanat Medina, our environmental health director. I didn't see you back there for a moment. And Patty Saunders, our development director; Sarah Banapur, our communications coordinator; and Lana Mabuba, who is an intern with us this summer. And Cisco Mercado is our policy director, and I would like to give him a special thanks for arranging this. And I almost forgot Jasmine, our water quality and community health coordinator, and her beautiful daughter. So thank you. Right, well, we'll go ahead and get started with the slides. And thank you to those of you who are also not in the room around the state of Alaska joining us through Teams. We appreciate your involvement here. And we want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to give just a quick overview of the findings of our report. And then Vi will present about the health, human rights, and environmental implications of these problems from her perspective and knowledge and expertise as a tribal citizen and a person who has deep knowledge about what is happening in Sivokak in the Northern Bering Sea. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So just a very brief overview of who we are. We're an environmental health and justice research and advocacy organization. We work at the state, local, international, and national levels to change policies so that they are protective of health and human rights. And we do this through community-based research, public education and training, organizing, advocacy, and we do work to achieve policy change at all levels. Next slide, please. This is the report, and again, we have hard copies here, or you can find the link there at the bottom of the slide. And I should say there were many authors, including several in this room, including myself, Sama, and Vi were authors. We have several contributing authors who were interns with us over the past several years. Dylan Jones, our community science coordinator. And we wanted to acknowledge Daly Sambo, who is she is staff with the University of Alaska, and she wrote the foreword. She was also the former president of the Inuit Circuit Polar Council. So many people were involved with this. We collaborated very closely with the International Pollutants Elimination Network, and ACAT is a participating organization of this incredible network of over 600 organizations throughout the world in about 120 different countries. For this report, we reviewed and included references from over 250 scientific peer-reviewed articles, so it was quite thorough. It took a couple of years to produce this report, so it's quite in-depth, and hopefully you'll enjoy reading it. Next slide, please. The report, as I mentioned, really talks about the convergence of chemicals and plastics and climate in the North, because as we know, the North and the circumpolar Arctic are warming at a rate 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. And this is exacerbating the problem of chemicals and plastics in the Arctic. It's increasing the mobilization into and also within the Arctic. And the Arctic, as Representative Josephson mentioned, is now a hemispheric sink for chemicals and plastics that rise on wind and ocean currents and accumulate now in the bodies of fish, wildlife, and people. So climate warming is really definitely exacerbating this problem, as we see with sea ice and glaciers and permafrost melting. These ice stores are now releasing these chemicals and plastics that had been sequestered, sometimes for decades, into the very areas that are the most important ecologically, and also some of the most important fishing and hunting places, traditional fishing and hunting places for Indigenous peoples of the North. Next slide, please. So this shows the research primarily of Dr. Melanie Bergman from Norway, who has done a lot of research cruises throughout the Arctic and documented microplastics in almost every environment that you can imagine, from beaches to the surface waters, to the deep oceans and the sediments, as well as in fish and wildlife. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the Arctic Ocean is now has the highest concentration of microplastics of any ocean basin on Earth. Slide, please. Thank you. Just a little bit of background about microplastics. These are tiny, sometimes microscopic particles of plastics that have broken down from large pieces of plastics or have been released in other ways through manufacturing, clothing, packaging, and other materials that we use. And we are exposed to these microplastics every day in air, drinking water, food, as well as in household dust. There are several reasons why we should be concerned. Not only are these microplastics physically a problem in our bodies, but they also carry many thousands of chemicals that are used in the manufacturing, including these classes of chemicals, plasticizers, flame retardants, and stabilizers. And it's estimated that we consume about 125,000 of these microplastics per year. They're found in just about every one of our body tissues, and also including breast milk. They have some serious health problems, increasing the risk of cancer, reproductive health problems, as well as cardiovascular and neurodevelopmental harm. Thank you. So these are some of the report findings about where microplastics are found in the Arctic, and it's estimated about 62,000 tons of plastics come into the Arctic Ocean every year. Again, as I mentioned, the Arctic Ocean has the highest concentrations of these microplastics in any ocean basin, and these are just some estimates of tonnage, 210,000 metric tons of microplastics. And interestingly, and unfortunately, the Arctic sea ice is a major global sink for microplastics, and the highest concentrations of microplastics are found at the sea ice edge as the ice is melting. And again, just to mention, I think because when we talk about the plastics crisis, sometimes it's forgotten or not discussed very much that these microplastics act as transporters of toxic chemicals into remote regions like the North and in the Arctic, because they not only carry these toxic chemicals that are used in the manufacturing, but as they're floating around in the ocean, they absorb toxic chemicals as they move on ocean currents. Next, please. Again, just a quick summation of some of the report findings. These microplastics have now been found in many species of the North and the Arctic, including marine mammals, all of these seal species, whales, walrus. And so these microplastics are very ubiquitous in the Arctic. And we're not only concerned about the harm that they do in our bodies physically, but again, conveying these hormone disrupting chemicals and cancer causing chemicals from the food web into the foods that people rely on as part of the traditional diet. So a huge number of fish species, 386 fish species worldwide have been found. Many seabirds, not only in the Arctic, but also worldwide. And the incidence of the occurrence of these microplastics in wildlife has increased at about 2.5% per year. So this is a problem that is really expounding over time because of the increased production and use and disposal, improper disposal of plastics. Talking about chemicals, because I think, again, in the plastics discussion, the chemicals are sometimes not fully discussed. But there was a new report produced by universities in Norway that show over 16,000 plastic chemicals. At least 25% are classified now as hazardous, but none of the plastic chemicals could be considered as safe. And these are chemicals and chemical classes that cause a range of health problems such as endocrine disruption, neurodevelopmental harm, reproductive, immune system impairment. So a range of health problems. Next slide, please. This is just one example of a chemical you may not have ever heard of. Most people have not. This is a UV stabilizer, ultraviolet light stabilizer, that's a common additive to plastics in the plastics production. And now the Arctic, because of the transport through microplastics, is now ending up in our seabirds and causing health problems in the seabirds. And I think the implications for human health are not yet fully understood. But this is an endocrine disruptor. It's detected in human milk. It has toxicity to our liver and kidneys, and also affects, it's anti-androgenic. Those are endocrine disrupting properties that affect the reproductive health of boys and men. This was nominated to the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Pollutants, which is the only legally binding treaty to eliminate the world's most dangerous chemicals, by Switzerland in 2020. And I'm happy to say it was listed under the Stockholm Convention just last year. But our own EPA has never taken any action to address this particular chemical and the other chemicals in the same class of plastic stabilizers. Yes, thank you. These are just some of the findings. I'll run through them briefly. We just had one hard copy of this report, but this is a new report produced by the group called Project Tender, Targeting Environmental Neurodevelopmental Risks. And this is a group of scientists, children's health advocates, and clinicians who work together to prepare a briefing paper for delegates to the Plastics Convention in April. So plastic particles are found in the human placenta, in a large percentage of human placental samples. It's found in babies' first stool, in breast milk, and infant formula. These microplastics, both microplastics and nanoplastic particles, can cross the blood-brain barrier. So the short summary of this is that babies are entering this world with their brains and bodies contaminated with plastics. These These particles and the microplastics themselves and the chemicals can affect the developing brain in these ways: growth, development, behavior, learning and memory, motor function. They are found in all placentas of low birth weight babies, but only 10% of normal weight babies. So this is a factor in babies being born low weight, which has really long-lasting implications for the health of that child. So lower birth weight, length, and head circumference, and lower scores on intelligence tests. There are several chemical classes that are particularly known to cause harm. Phthalates that are plasticizers can harm the reproductive and developmental health of babies, particularly young boys. The polybrominated diphenyl ethers are a class of flame retardants that have been added to a range of products, including furniture foam, carpet backing, and toys, and many other products that we use in our homes. Bisphenols are used in hard plastics, polycarbonate plastics that are used in baby bottles and water bottles and many other types of hard plastics. And these get into our homes and into our bodies because they don't stay in these products. They leach into our food and dust, and they are widely found, these chemical classes, in pregnant women, infants, and children. They can pass to the fetus through the placenta and then also in breast milk and formula. This is a slide to show that the fossil fuel industry is really investing heavily in the production of chemicals and plastics. As the demand for fossil fuels for direct combustion is declining, as we're making a transition to more renewable energy sources and electrification, this is where the fossil fuel industry, chemicals and plastics industries want to place their efforts so they can continue to justify the production of fossil fuels. And over 98% of the plastics that we have on the market are produced from fossil fuels. Really, most as well, most of the chemicals that we use, these persistent chemicals and toxic chemicals, are produced from fossil fuels. So this is an industry projection, and so just so we are aware, it's very important for us to make the transition to renewable-based energy sources, but we also have to reduce and eliminate the production of these harmful chemicals and plastics that fossil fuels are being used to produce. There is hope. In 2022, 172 nations of the world came together under the United Nations Environment Program and agreed to negotiate a global legally binding treaty on plastics by the end of this year. And so in Ottawa in April of 2024, we had the fourth negotiating session, and Vi and I were able to attend that, and ACAT has been very involved, along with our colleagues at the International Pollutants Elimination Network, in the negotiation of this treaty to make sure that it's a strong treaty that really considers the public health and human rights implications of this global problem. And these are just some recommendations that we have for state policy, because this is such a massive problem that it's really important for us to work on all levels to address this problem. Yes, we have to work internationally because these chemicals and plastics don't respect political boundaries, but these are some things that we can do right here in the state. And we want to thank Representative Josephson for introducing a bill this past session that would eliminate the use of a particularly harmful plastic called polystyrene, also known as styrofoam, in food packaging, because that's one of the major ways that people are exposed to harmful chemicals, carcinogenic chemicals like styrene, in food packaging. And it doesn't stay in the food packaging and gets into the food and beverages that we drink and eat from. So we want to ban unintentionally added microplastics in consumer products. There are a range of products, from cosmetics and personal care products, paints, textiles, and cleaning products, where microplastics are added, usually to add different qualities of texture and abrasiveness to these products. So we can put pressure on the market by enacting state and national policies to eliminate these unintentionally added microplastics. We also can do a lot to eliminate unnecessary plastics use, particularly single-use plastics. That's a great place to start, because so much of these products that we use that are kind of forced upon us are unnecessary in our lives. And then I think we can also take a number of steps to eliminate the most hazardous plastics, including polyvinyl chloride and polystyrene and harmful plastics additives that I've mentioned. And then we also need a comprehensive microplastics testing strategy, because these microplastics are in our water, air, and food, and yet there's virtually no testing for these microplastics. Next. I won't go through all these, but these were some of the recommendations from the report for the Plastics Treaty itself. Number one is this treaty must protect health and the environment, reduce the overall production and use of plastics and toxic chemicals, and address the problem of plastics at all stages of the life cycle, because it's not just a problem of plastics floating around in the ocean, although that is a big problem, but we have to move upstream and address some of the core issues of the problems of chemicals and plastics. And I will turn it over to Bai.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Waghiyi. I'm the daughter of the late John and Della Waghiyi from Sivokak, which is our traditional name for St. Lawrence Island. I'm a mother and grandmother, and I would like to acknowledge our creator, Apachtak, who we call Apachtak, and our ancestors and our leadership and communities on Sivokak. We have had our own community-based project in partnership with our tribes, Native Village Gamble and Native Village Savunga, with Alaska Community Action on Toxics. And I have been with ACAT for 22 years. I'm coming up on, I started as I had no experience in this field. And the more I've come to learn of how these toxic exposures affect our health and well-being and affect our children's ability to learn, is very alarming as a mother and grandmother. And during the Plastics Treaty, we brought in Arctic Indigenous Peoples delegation in Ottawa. It's very difficult to travel a long distance. However, our voices need to be heard. I've been to Geneva, Switzerland for the Stockholm Convention. And it's so important that because of where we live, as my colleague explained, the Arctic has become a hemispheric sink for these microplastics, but also persistent organic pollutants. We now know the Arctic is because of our reliance on our subsistence foods and because of where we live, we are some of the most highly contaminated people on the planet. A burden we didn't create. So it's so important that we are proactive. And our leadership want us to share our data. We have had our own community-based project due to concerns from 2 former Air Force bases from the Cold War, but also looking at these persistent organic pollutants that arrive here through air and ocean currents. And now to know that the microplastics, there's something very wrong if we're finding them in placenta, in the brain of our children. I'm raising a grandson, and my 4 sons are grown. And it's alarming to learn that my grandson, his ability to learn, all of our children, we saw a little infant here. How can we pass on our languages, our traditional stories, our songs and dances, and our traditions and cultures if our children cannot learn? We have relied on Indigenous people's knowledge and living some of the most harsh locations on the planet, some people believe. Our Creator gave us everything that we needed. Live in harmony with our lands, airs, and waters with the utmost respect. And to learn that, the persistent organic pollutants and now microplastics, and also the rapid change of the climate. We have been the canary in the coal mine. Our elders in the 50s and 60s tried to alert their observations in the changes of our lands, airs, and waters in the 50s and 60s, but it fell on deaf ears. And now we are running out of time. And during the plastics treaty, we had an opportunity as Indigenous people that gathered from throughout the globe to meet with the UN Special Rapporteur on toxics and health. Because our basic human right to health, our basic human right to food and subsistence, free and prior informed consent, are all being violated by these multinational corporations who produce these toxic chemicals, including the 16,000 that is used in the production of plastics, and only 8% is recycled. Next slide. And we, as a delegation, we called for a strong plastic treaty that protects the health of our children's developing brains by reducing the production and use of plastics and any other generation of plastic particles, and by preventing the harmful effects of plastics throughout their life cycle. Our womb are our children's first environment. And what that is so sacred. I'm a cancer survivor. I've had 3 miscarriages. My people have 4 to 10 times higher PCBs in the blood of our people than the average American in the lower 48 from the 2 Cold War era former bases, but also because of where we live in our nakapik, our traditional food that is loaded with persistent organic pollutants, and to learn that now these microplastics are in our oceans. Our elders called our ocean our farm. We have relied on marine mammals and wildlife, taking only what we need, and to learn that these, next slide, microplastics are ending up in the walrus, seals, the seabirds, the fish my people have relied on. And it's so important that Arctic Indigenous people, our knowledge is the foundation of all of our community-based research and a call to action. My people are calling on you to be champions for us as legislators in the state of Alaska. We know that we're a heavy fossil fuel dependent state, and with the decline of oil and gas production, there's a push for more microplastics. And we call on you to take our voices. We should be at the table when decisions are made for us, generally miles and miles away. That's why it's so important. As part of our CBPR, we bring Arctic Indigenous Peoples delegation to the Stockholm Convention and to the Plastics Treaty. These are burdens we didn't create. And these are just some of the quotes that you can see from our leaders and knowledge holders. And Delbert, the top photo on the left, he is a strong voice for our people. He feels that we are running out of time. We are in a climate crisis. And we call on you to listen and share our story as you go forward in the decisions that you make for our people. Next slide. These are just some of the images from my community. The young women you see on the left are of our young women from the early 50s and 60s, when the military came to our island. And some of these women are now facing reproductive health harms, like myself. We attribute health harms that we're seeing in our people. We have a cancer crisis. It's not a matter of people get cancer, but when. Our ability to conceive, our ability to carry our children are all being harmed, not only by POPs, but these microplastics. And this is an image. We have some of the most beautiful sunsets during our winters. That's a picture of Angyak skin boat. So a way of life we have lived in harmony, taking only what we need, and to learn that we are some of the most contaminated people on the planet. Burdens we didn't create. That's why it's so important. I'm here to share our story and my voice for my community. Sivoka. Sivoma is one of the communities, Gamble is the other. There was 20,000 of us at one time. Now we have 2 communities left. We had 32 villages, pre-Western contact. But we're still here. And as a mother and grandmother, I have become an advocate for my people and children and future generations. And the main takeaways from this report, that there is a long history of resource exploitation and colonization of Arctic Indigenous peoples' lands and waters, including by the fossil fuel petrochemical industry. And due to the rapid warming of the Arctic, it's forcing climate-induced community displacements, threatening food security. With the melting of the ice, we now know the Arctic is warming 8 times more than the rest of the planet. If there's no ice, our freezers are empty. The marine mammals my people have relied on for millennia. The walrus are main food during the winter, and seals. If there's no ice, it affects our ability to hunt for the marine mammals. But to learn now, we're also, to learn of the food security due to the shrinking of the permafrost glaciers and ice, the influx of these microplastics that we're finding in our marine mammals, walrus, seals, seabirds. It should be alarming what is happening to our people, and that many of the multinational oil and gas corporations that are active in Alaska have long track records of environmental violations, and we all know that in this room. The production and use of fossil fuels is the starting point for the problems faced by the Arctic related to plastics, chemicals, and climate change. Plastics and chemicals produced all over the globe deposit and accumulate here in the Arctic, making the Arctic a hemispheric sink for chemicals and plastics. Plastics that carry toxic chemicals that you heard from my colleague, including harmful chemicals that are known to persist in the environment, are in the Arctic. So I have become highly critical because our government and state and federal agencies a lot of times do not take our Indigenous people's knowledge. We have been at the forefront of witnessing what's happening in the Arctic decades ago, and we have solutions. Please, whenever we have discussions of climate change, warming of the globe, make sure that Arctic Indigenous peoples are at the forefront. We saw our lands, airs, and waters when they were pristine and when our people thrived. And to see the destruction and devastation to our wildlife my people have relied on for centuries. I know it sounds all gloomy, however, we are here. Together we are stronger. I thank you for this opportunity to come to you. And we all have grandchildren, I mean, parents, grandchildren, aunts, niece, aunts and uncles. Our children need us to make sure measures are in place. Meaningful measures are in place to protect our children and future generations. Last slide. I'd like to acknowledge Annie Aloha. She was a former health aide who started noticing the high rates of cancers in low birth weight babies and miscarriages from the 2 formerly used defense sites on our island. And she tried to get help for our people for 20 years. She got sent to agency. In 20 years came around full circle, 7 agencies. And we are continuing her work in my community. We have been doing our own research since 1997. A lot of times we work with communities from throughout the state who come to us as the last resort after they've exhausted all efforts trying to get help for themselves, their families, communities. Whether it's from toxic chemicals that are associated with maybe historic mining or community up north asked us to train their youth council how to do their own air monitoring due to concerns from the flare-ups from oil development. We looked at at-risk communities in the that came to us from the Red Dog mine. So it's important that when you are making decisions for our people in all of Alaska, keep in mind particularly our story of Arctic Indigenous people. This is we are a beautiful state. If you come to my community, we welcome you. We want to get to know you. And please keep this report and as you go forward to make meaningful change to protect our most vulnerable, our children. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much again for participating in this, and we would welcome any questions that you might have. Just a couple of points that I wanted to make. First of all, we are doing this for the children and future generations. We're doing this for Vi's grandson, Jasmine's beautiful baby, Lydia, and that's what we keep in mind every day. So I just want to say that's the reason we do this work. And also very recently, within the past month, we did a poll with Ivan Moore of 1,700 people throughout the state. And 55% of Alaskans said that they're very or extremely concerned about microplastics. And this crossed all party affiliations and genders and differences in who people are. And then 75% said that they felt that microplastics were a threat to drinking water and food. So this is an issue that people in Alaska are aware of. They're concerned about it. And I think we're going to demand action from policymakers. So Representative Josephson has really stepped up, and we really hope to also encourage many other policymakers to take action on this issue. So again, thank you so much. And we do welcome questions.
Go ahead.
There's so much plastic. I mean, I'm a kayaker for 40 years at Prince William Sound in different places in the state. Lived in Gillingham and the Bay, lived on the North Slope. And the plastic is ubiquitous. So is there a safe way? I mean, is there really a safe way to dispose of plastic so that its half-life is really, really long?
Yeah.
And we're dealing with the microplastic as part of, previous plastics, quote, half-lives. How do we really safely dispose? I mean, it's almost like we have to absolutely stop making plastic. But how do we dispose of the amounts that we have?
And that's a very difficult and complicated question, and there's no good answer. So the answer is really, no, I'm serious. the answer is to reduce and eliminate the sources and to stop making the problem worse. There's really no safe way to dispose of plastics, I'm sorry to say. The chemical industry will tell you that there are means called advanced recycling and chemical recycling, but that's essentially burning plastics, which we know causes more harm in our communities because it just liberates those toxic chemicals, then we breathe them in. So right now, there's no safe solution. There are some technologies coming online called peroxidative treatment technologies that can break down the plastics, but those are still at bench scale. They're not ready for commercial use. So right now, what we can do is at least dispose of them safely, don't burn them, but stop the production and use, and especially of those unnecessary plastics that we're all, I think forced to purchase as consumers. But I really wish there were a better solution, but.
Can I just add briefly, at the plastics treaty, industry outnumbered delegates and NGOs. The State Department and EPA sent 40 staff that were very active to weaken the language of the treaty. And we've seen this at the Stockholm Convention, career staff from US government and EPA that are very active. And to know that the US is not even a party to the Stockholm Convention, but to watch the same thing play out at the plastics treaty. That's why we want states to step up to make sure measures are in place to protect our people.
I did have one thing to add, because it's a really good and complicated question. One thing that we can do, because Vi mentioned right now, only about 8% of plastics are recycled. So we all really want to do the right thing and recycle as much as we can. But it's really because of all the toxic chemical additives that are used in plastics that make them unrecyclable. So if we could address the toxic chemicals in plastics, get them out of plastics, then we can have more of a circular reuse of plastics and make recycling safe. Right now, if you throw something in the trash, chances are if it's recycled, it's going to be melted down and used in a household product. And then that product, it could be, a spatula, it could be food packaging, is toxic because the toxic chemicals are getting recycled in the plastic. So the number one thing, in addition to reducing and eliminating our use of unnecessary plastics, is to end the inclusion of toxic chemicals and toxic chemical classes in plastics. So just wanted to mention that. Thanks for the question.
So I'm a beekeeper. We're beekeepers here in Alaska, in Anchorage. And it's really difficult to overwinter honeybees in our climate. But we thought we'd come across a pretty good alternative how to do this. And now I'm so disappointed and so concerned because the materials that we use for our hives are some of the materials listed on your slides. So the best way we have found to overwinter honeybees here is to use polystyrene hives, not wooden ones. And now I'm very concerned about, that manufacture, but also the honey that we produce, because we make a big deal about buying local honey and not honey that's been processed and available at Costco or Fred Meyer. So now I'm totally concerned about what I've been doing for 9 years and the harm that's going to cause the community, our consumers, and that's very. I'm just alarmed, I guess is my point, because I didn't expect to see polystyrene listed on your slide.
Yeah.
What can we do?
It's a right to know issue. It's not your fault that you had no idea that the product that you're using is harmful, possibly to the bees, but also the product and the people.
Yeah.
So it should be industries that manufacture. There's over 130,000 chemicals made and produced, and only a handful are ever tested for their safety before they're put on the market. Not knowing we're bringing them into our homes, workplaces. So it's not your fault.
Yes.
Well, I just didn't expect to see that because I thought we'd stumble upon the way to do it right. Because killing bees at the end of the season is not the answer, but a lot of people have been doing that here because they think it's impossible to overwhelm it. Okay, thank you.
That's interesting. Yeah. And, you know, we'd be happy to work with you to help research maybe alternative materials. Polystyrene, styrofoam is a great insulator. And, you know, I understand why it's useful to you, but maybe we could work together somehow to find some alternative materials.
My question is, what kind of response or engagement are you having at the federal level with our Alaska State delegation?
Well, we have met with them on this topic, and actually Senator Sullivan's office sent a staff person to the plastics treaty in Ottawa. He is very concerned about the problem of plastics in the ocean, that is macroplastics mostly, the visible ones, and introduced some legislation to help reduce plastics in the ocean. But beyond that, I would say that our delegation, unfortunately, is not very proactive. So we have to keep at it.
And so hearing from their constituents, the voters, maybe something that someone like I could
Yes.
participate in, or other people, and I don't know, are you doing any kind of communication campaigns with Alaskan voters to communicate to our delegation?
I'm really glad you raised that because there is some national legislation called Break Free from Plastics. And right now there are members of Congress, mostly on the Democratic side, that are supporting that, but it's a small group. And so far our delegation has not signed on to that legislation. So that's one thing that we can all do together. And we will work on some action alerts over the next weeks and months to get some action.
Also, we're seeing species die out, fish, birds, seals, and whales. And with the surface of the ocean warming, we believe that the plankton and krill have to go in deeper where it's colder. And the little fish that rely on the plankton and krill, and as they go up the food chain is mistaking the microplastics. We have a story from Delbert. 2 summers ago, he went to our cliffs. 90% of our homes eat only traditional foods. He said, "Vi, it was so eerie. Normally there's so many cliff birds. The sky is black and it's so loud and thunderous." He said, "Vi, there were no cliff birds." And we see our beaches with fish and bird die-offs. So this is the ocean. What's happening to our ocean is indicating what's happening to our people and the globe and wildlife.
I think, what's the prospect for the legislation you put forward, and what are the biggest hurdles for that legislation?
Well, political will is certainly a big hurdle. So we had a good hearing on our bill. I'm the state lead for what's called the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. And I routinely attend their annual meeting. What you see is in other states, there's more political will to advance these sort of bills. So they have prohibitions on things like polystyrene. And they have other efforts that are seeing some success. I think there's a tendency in Alaska, and I noticed this when I had a plastic bag ban bill, to think that it's so vast and it's so untrammeled that there couldn't possibly be these sorts of problems here. But obviously the evidence is that that's untrue, that there are these problems, significantly so. So it takes focus, and we've been very clever this session, particularly on public safety measures and finding creative ways to advance bills by offering amendments into other bills that are more sort of appealing, that are on a pathway to success and sort of hitching a ride on those bills. So we're going to keep trying, and that's, you know, I don't want to be too political, because especially in this building, but elections matter, and I'll just leave it at that.
So, to follow up, I would just guess that a lot of people's fear is that whatever their favorite take home is gonna arrive to them cold because it wasn't put in polystyrene, and that their personal enjoyment is gonna be impacted by this. Is that something that has been not shown to be not a problem in states where they have taken on these bans?
Well, you know, this is really something I'd like to hear from Vi or Pam, and they're such treasures to have these two wonderful Alaskans here. We're lucky to have that. But I think the growth in the plastics industry begins right after World War II significantly. And the question is, you're speaking to human comfort and ease. And, you know, were the people in the 30s and 40s miserable? I mean, they may have been during the Great Depression, but setting that aside, what would be the burden to everyday Americans in returning to, I don't know.
Things that last longer, that are made to last.
Sorry. Is it possible? It's almost a sociology question. Is it possible to talk about that?
Sure, and I think there are good alternatives. People want takeout food or to go in and get their own food, bringing their own containers. I think that requires kind of a shift in our thinking, but it's very possible. And I've noticed that a number of restaurants now offer cardboard containers, which, you know, that it produces waste, but at least that doesn't last as plastics do for probably just indefinitely. So, you know, I think we just need to kind of rethink the way that we view these things and our responsibility, and, you know, allowing for reuse of things and bringing our own containers. Yeah.
And I just want to mention, there's at least one store in town, there may be a second one that's coming up, that is a place that encourages people to bring their own containers in. They do not sell items in plastic. They make a point of going and purchasing items that do not have plastic packaging. So they either have the glass there for you to bring in, or you bring in your own. And I just encourage people to check out that option.
Right.
It's actually
Blue market,
about 200 yards.
It's just across the road. Well, and with plastic bags, you know, we can all bring our own tote bags. And so that reduces a huge source of plastics in the environment. So I think, yes, to some extent, it might reduce people's comfort level to make the shift, but I think the plastics problem is having such a profound effect on our environment and human health. I think it's worth it for us to go that extra distance.
I would also like to have them start charging for plastic cutlery, because I never use it and it's so offensive when they send 15 and there's only 3 of us.
Yeah.
But
That's another bill that was proposed, not proposed, but considered. California has been a leader in that, and it's another bill we could offer.
And it's certainly not like you can still offer it, you just charge them for it, and so that people would opt out because I don't want it. But it's always felt like to me that a big reason why our delegation and others are so protective of the fossil fuel industry, obviously it's our biggest economic driver at times anyway. I feel like that's like waxing and waning sometimes now, but is that they believe that the fossil fuel industry can't, what are they gonna do with all these extra chemicals that they're making, right? Like, are they taking these petroleum products and making these bad chemicals on purpose? Or are they just byproducts of something else that we actually are needing to use and have to get rid of it somehow? Like, and as long as you call it a plasticizer or a stabilizer or a UV retardant, you can put it into a product and sell that product. But if you call it a waste stream, now you have an EPA problem and a time clock and all these other problems that are associated with it. So
Yeah.
are these things necessary byproducts of things that we do need for our military industrial complex, for making fuels better, for what other reasons that might be legitimate, right? Not legitimate as in like virtuous, legitimate as like, we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
And then, so how do you address that? Because if these are just waste streams, how do we get them to address their waste streams? Because that will add significant costs. As soon as we switch them over from what we're calling them now, legitimate purpose things, which many of us question, right, to waste streams, everybody has to pay that cost. And now we actually have to do something. So, like, I feel like that's where a lot of the reluctance to figure out how to stop this is coming from. Because what are they gonna do with them? Right?
Yeah.
Like, why would they keep making them if they could just quit making them? They have to make them because they're associated with something else that we, I don't know, need, but we're gonna make. And that's where the billions comes in, right? So.
Well, I think, to answer your question, most of these chemicals, chemical classes in plastics are intentionally produced. And I'll give you an example, and I'll talk about a concept called regrettable substitution. There's a class of flame retardant chemicals that were added to so many products, like polyurethane foam that's used in furniture and carpet padding. And the chemical industry told the story that it was necessary because if we don't have these flame retardants in all of these products, in our couches, in our chairs, and pillows and mattresses, that people would die, that they would burn, that this increased the chance that there would be more fires in our homes. Well, that was a lie, because these products can be designed in such a way that you can keep fire safety, which is of critical importance, without adding toxic chemicals that then make our homes, indoor environments more toxic. So for the most part, these toxic flame retardant additives to plastics were completely unnecessary. They were used in toys like little rubber duckies and things like, who needs a, flame retardant rubber ducky? So the chemical industry has created a market and a need for us to purchase these products because they want something to do with the feedstock that they're producing. And there are all kinds of examples. And so then many of us worked really hard to get these PBDE flame retardants banned statewide, national. We have an ordinance in Anchorage that eliminates flame retardants in children's products. We tried to get that statewide, it didn't work. But nationally and internationally, a lot of actions were taken on these so-called legacy flame retardants, the PBDEs. But then, guess what? The chemical industry invented a whole new set of flame retardant chemicals, organophosphate, chlorinated organophosphate flame retardants that they started adding because that set of molecules was not regulated. So this is what they do. This is the regrettable substitution thing. So they're creating the market. They're telling us what is necessary when in fact, this is just a false narrative. So most are intentionally produced, both plastics and chemicals. Some result from waste streams, like the recycling that I mentioned, that results in the making of some new products from things like plastic bottles and other plastics that are recycled, a very small percentage, and these are remade into products. But again, because there are toxic chemicals in these, they really should not be recycled into, especially food contact materials like spatulas and food containers and all of those other things. So I hope I answered. That's a very good question.
Could you start including that in your presentations? Most of these chemicals are intentionally made and don't have to be.
Yeah.
Because I think that the protectiveness a lot of people feel for the fossil fuel industry, because we're so foolish to be getting high on our own supply. It's just drug dealing 101. You should not do that. You should.
Absolutely.
And it's the same with our energy dependence, right? Our small, poor communities are absolutely stuck buying things that are bad for them, that harm them, and that keep them impoverished. And that's just so wrong. But we need to know that it's not necessary, right? It is optional. There are alternatives for all of these things. And I don't think that that message is strong enough.
Yeah.
Because we are worried about quality of life. I personally don't like it when I see the heat of the food harming the polystyrene. I think, wow, that's gotta be hurting me, right? But I still order it.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the very least, because plastics still are ubiquitous in our world, at the very least, people should not be microwaving in plastic. And I agree, and just as I said to our beekeeper friend here, the burden should not be on the consumer. We shouldn't have to go to the store and make these decisions that affect our families, that affect our communities. The burden should not be on us, the burden should be on industry to produce safe materials, safe chemicals. And right now it's not. There are very few labeling requirements for many of the products that we use every day. So for instance, if you picked up a bottle of shampoo, you wouldn't necessarily know that it has phthalates in it, a very toxic class of chemicals, because the manufacturers are not required to put that on their labels. If you see the word fragrance on it, that's kind of a code for that class of chemicals called phthalates. So there's a lot we can do with labeling. There's a lot we can do to reduce the demand and to find alternative materials. But it requires policy change. So I think we like to say that we can't buy ourselves out of this problem. That's why we're calling on our state policymakers and national and international policymakers to make these changes, to hold the industry accountable, because right now they certainly aren't.
And the people who need help the most, we're a heavy fossil fuel dependent state. My brother pays $2,000 a month in winter to heat his home. It should not be there's something wrong here. We need to stop fossil fuel and petrochemical industry subsidies, right? They're the one getting all the profits, and it's all about profits and greed, and do not take our health and well-being into account. There are several alternatives. Alaska has so much potential.
I wanted to add something to your comment, which was brilliant. When they say, oh, if we can't use those chemicals in this product, it's going to cost more. Industry has been using this argument since time immemorial. Basically what's happening is they are externalizing their costs, okay? They should be dealing with their hazardous products as hazardous product, whatever. They're not, which means they're externalizing that cost to us. They can sell us cheap hazardous stuff that gives us cancer, and then who has to pay for our cancer? We have to pay for our cancer. That there are health costs associated with these things. And so the idea that these cheap products shouldn't have to cost more, like that's a bad thing. I'm like, no, it's a safe thing. They've been doing that since forever. So the economics is actually a little bit even more complicated than that, but that to me is always the one that's outrageous, is that who pays for the healthcare costs? When people get sick because of these cheap petrochemical products.
The amount of plastics that's used in current healthcare is also
Yeah,
they get you there too.
That is
any of our cancers that we survive is actually an economic driver, sadly. I mean, if you're just using economics as the measure, if you're not
You're not accounting for.
Cancer's not the only, let's put it that way, but I mean, that's the one we always, that's the fallback one that we always say, but there are lots of other healthcare costs. And a lot of times people don't even know that it's associated with the products that they're using in their home.
And there is a good, I'm glad you raised the issue about use of plastics in healthcare. It is an immense problem. And there is a group, national and international group called Healthcare Without Harm that's working with hospitals to reduce the plastics used in healthcare.
Or at least make them the more safe kind,
Yeah,
hopefully.
Yeah, an example that they actually advocated because they were using polyvinyl chloride in the bags, the IV bags. And they worked to get PVC eliminated from that since it was a direct source right into your body. So there is some progress on that front, not quick enough, but. I think we wanna,
Yeah. So I want to thank both you and your staff, both, as I said, treasured. I really enjoyed hearing from you as well. Very impressive. So I was lucky to be invited to the Alaska Conservation Foundation's, do I have the group name correct? Award, and I think you were both awardees, as I recall. So ACAT showed up very well at the event. But this is naturally troubling and concerning, but we have to move forward in the most constructive way we can. And glad that we had Alaska Public Media here. And I just want to thank you very much for your presentation.
And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank
And
you.
we have lots of pizza, so please have some, take some home.
Sorry, you're working.
Congrats. Okay, thanks.
How like to be able to do this?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the environmental program administrator over there.
Okay.
So we've been doing to all the benefits, foods and environmental issues.
Yeah.
Through this.
Forever.
20 years.
Sent the link.
For a long time. And right now we're working on a solid waste for recycling.
Get it out there.
And a big part of that is how do you get plastics out of your landfill so they don't catch on fire? Most rural Alaska landfills. They don't want to.
Yeah.
They still have to go. And
Oh my gosh.
you get to work, you get on your berries, you know, your brother.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, if you had,
Plastic.
like, the
And it's one of the
something.
hardest things to change maybe people's behavior is like stop burning. I just.